When I created the title of this swell, I didn't make it up. I took it right from Hallie Stern's LinkedIn page. And I'm mentioning that because when we think about the language of ethical tech and us understanding what's going on in the world, it does feel like there's a lot of disorder. And there are people like Hallie who are trying to make order out of disorder. And she's helping us connect the dots. Her entire career has been focused on working inside organizations who are committed to doing research and creating policy to help protect us in cyberspace. But something she says in her LinkedIn page really is quite powerful to me, and I'm going to read it. She says, everything that happens online influences human responses offline before making its way back into the digital sphere. So she's looking at this whole loop, which I really think is fascinating. She also wants to talk specifically with us about the connection between marketing and cybersecurity. So I think as a community, the more we become emboldened with information about this, the better we behave in all spheres of our life. So let's get into this. Let's make sure we understand what the government's doing, what private organizations doing, what Hallie's doing, to really understand best practices to mitigate any bad actors in this space, mitigate their power over us, and this concept of digital disorder. Hallie, can you talk about that phrase for us? What is digital disorder? And why are you into this? And what happened? What's a seminal event in your life that made you really want to focus in on helping people with their digital strategies?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Wow. Okay. So digital disorder is such a loaded, huge word that makes up so much of what's going on in the information space today. Actually, as a kind of joke, a friend of mine and I are writing a paper called Cybersecurity. Everyone bought in, but everyone bought a different product. And it's this idea that everything is topsy-turvy. Nobody knows how to moderate content, what's going on with the algorithms, how information is being propagated, how people are being targeted with this information, and what the actual media ecosystem looks like from a technical ad tech and algorithmic perspective. So it is quite literally in disorder, but it all feeds each other in different ways, right? So, if you're seeing a story on your newsfeed on a social media platform, for example, you're already at the end of a funnel. It is too late. Content moderation at that point is just a game of whack-a-mole. So, looking into the algorithms that propagate that specific information and put that story in front of you, I think is where organizations really need to start focusing, writing policies and figuring out how to mitigate harm from that technical perspective. As far as some events in my life that have led me down this road, I actually used to work in entertainment in my early 20s, and it was right as everything was going online, and I would find ways to manipulate the algorithm for my own selfish self-gain. I'd DDoS my own IMDb page, or I'd target specific cohorts with stories that I would write that I would want to get in front of the right people. Or I would find loopholes in getting followers and ranking. Ranking signals is huge on social media. So I got really good at manipulating that. And that kind of led to me doing it for other people. And then it led to this solo trip around the world where I was studying digital entrepreneurship and marketing across borders in Africa and Southeast Asia. And long story short, because it really is a much longer story than this, I ended up volunteering at this refugee camp in Greece. And I noticed that a lot of my students were coming over not just because of the atrocities they were experiencing in the countries they were fleeing, but they were seeing these stories that were giving them hope of a future in Europe and in the United States. And the end of the funnel would be these amazing stories of like what their lives could be like. But it ended up creating this kind of sensory funnel. So these algorithms that would track through their signals technology everything that they were doing and their movement, would specifically silo the information they were getting to give them only what it thought they wanted to see, same as in marketing. And so my students would come over and they would expect one thing, see something completely different, be in horrible living situations in the camp, and then continue to like propagate the story because now they're in Europe, but they have to show that they've made it. So they would take, photos around the island, even though they were living in these really horrible camp conditions, but they would project this idea of what it looked like to make it. And that really got to me. It was a mix of them being at the end of this marketing funnel that was showing them a story that it thought that they wanted to see, but also using the data across all of their technology to propagate those stories and to also cause harm to them, to hack, track, and extort them through their phones. And so from there, I applied to grad school at NYU to focus on the human side of cyber conflict, which I actually kind of took from my advisor, Pano Yanakajergos, who really inspired that, and decided to mix the two. So obviously there's more to the story than that. But yeah, it has been quite a journey from working in marketing to working in like cybersecurity, marketing, and information environments. But I really, really love it and hope that I can help bridge understanding between all of the pieces that put this environment together.
Hallie, that is such an interesting story. The origin story is so unbelievable. And I just want to say before I ask my next question, I just want to thank you for sort of seeing the opportunity to help people in such a specific way. A lot of people discover inequities and things that are wrong, and they just turn a blind eye because they just can't handle the intensity of it. And I'm just so moved by your story. I know there's a longer one, and I'm sure there's a place maybe you can link us where you've told this story in more depth. Please use the description to cut and paste a URL if there's a place you want us to read something more. With respect to this community trying to learn about, where cyber security crosses over into their lives, whether somebody works for a company or individually, I think there's an education curve that's pretty steep, because some of the language you used in your response was even difficult for me to understand, because algorithms, it's just a big buzzword for a lot of us. We don't really understand how to manipulate it, obviously, but we also don't understand how it's controlling our lives. So I wanted you to take just one step back, if you will, when you engage a client in a consultancy. How do you do an intake to understand the system that you're about to help? Sometimes some of the smartest people have big gaps in knowledge. So how do you know how to help people, and when is it a time where you say, you don't have to understand this, let me just do it? Or when do you want to educate an entire company or an entire C-suite so that they really buy into your services? Thanks so much for answering this question. I think it's going to help a lot of us understand how you do your work and how you assess people's level of understanding about what you can do for them.
Thank you. Again, that is a great question. I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding what I do for them. I have a hard time explaining what I do sometimes because I'm non-technical. I am not a coder. My Python is mediocre at best, the coding language. I just happen to be really, really good at like open source investigations and understanding the different pieces of the digital environment. And if you look at like how American adversaries, for example, look at the information space, they don't like silo cyber versus algorithms versus media. It's all one big information space. And so I've adopted a similar idea of how are we operating across everything we do using the information space both to our advantage and our disadvantage. And I think that starts with what's knowable about you. What data are you putting out? What does your footprint look like? How is that collected? And how are you interacting online? Now, what we do online really is a mirror of what we do offline. Our social network is made up of our actual social network, people that we are in direct contact with and communicate with. And that is all collected by various algorithms, that is recipes that tell the internet and the computer what to do and what output to give you, what website to go to, etc. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of different kinds of algorithms that make up our information environment. The cybersecurity side of it, again, I know that we kind of look at it as the separate, like Mr. Robot hacking into computers thing, and it's not always that. When someone is hacking into a computer, they're doing so to gain access to information, data. That is the data that you put out in your patterns when you interact with the internet. And so there's this disconnect between marketing and cybersecurity, but the reality is it all comes down to data. Right? Marketing uses data to propagate information. Cybersecurity prevents people from gaining access to that information through technical means. So I apologize for my my wording in my previous answer. DDoS is direct denial of service. When I talked about my IMDb page, where essentially I'd have a bunch of different computers go to my IMDb page and click on the page, so it looked like I had a lot of visitors, and that would push my ranking up because it looked like people were interested in my page. So I think, number one, separating this idea that the information environment is this big scary thing that has to be in these separate compartmentalized silos. We are all totally capable of knowing what's knowable about us and interacting in this environment safely. I, to be honest, haven't taken a math class since 10th grade. So I'm not special. This is something we all can do. But when working with clients to see what they need, what their worries are, what their concerns are, I look at what are they trying to protect? What is important to them? Is it their data? Is it their, is it proprietary information? Is it their brand? Is it what is being talked about them? Is it promoting what they're doing? Is it promoting their software? So in plain English, what is it exactly that they want to do to grow as a business or as a company or as a person, and what does that look like in the data? And then how do you protect it? How do you propagate it? How do you push it out? Or how do you push out messaging around an idea?
Hallie, I also think you're sort of in the business of giving people this sense of agency, which I really appreciate, and your answer really helps with understanding what we are capable of, and the questions you ask are helpful because you make us realize that we have to know what we're trying to protect. And I just have one more question about the connection between our data and the government. I know people understand that if the government says to an agency like Apple or Meta, we need this data for some specific issue. If there's a real breach and they need to know something about somebody, there's this very strong arm that's able to extricate that information. And we have all these sort of Hollywood ideas about what that really looks like. But I'm wondering if you can help us understand where the overreach is and where it's okay, and what your opinion is about all that. And I guess you could talk about TikTok because that's on top of mind for a lot of people with regard to what's going on there. But I don't want to obfuscate this question with getting involved with TikTok. But I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that, because it's really about what is the data on TikTok and why is it so precious. And just another thing, I just also want to say that sometimes algorithms are wonderful, right? Like the recommendation softwares that help us, discover new music. That's all good and fine. So it's just interesting to know our footprint and to have someone like you help us through this. So it's very cool. So thanks for answering the question about government reach and what that looks like from your perspective and how you advise people.
Thanks so much. These are great questions. So I think when we think of government and overreach, we clump together this like big, scary government bubble of bad guys who want to collect data on U.S. citizens. And it really just doesn't work like that. There are so many different components to what actually goes on in the U.S. government. So first and foremost, like the defense community cannot collect on U.S. citizens without a warrant, and even with a warrant, that is for domestic collectors like FBI, and there has to be a real reason to gain access to that data. Now, a lot of the question of data moderation coming from big tech, right? What access do they have? How is that data being sold? How are your interactions being sold? That is a big concern. Because these are private companies, and the government can't exactly say, here, private company, you have to do this with your data, right? So there's a big disconnect between the two. What is happening in like what you see on TV, for example, with policymakers, like not knowing what is going on with Facebook or TikTok versus what other sides of USG are doing, are very, very different, and they're also very disconnected. So I think it's important to remember that these are very different arms within the U.S. government that have very different authorities to do very different things. And that we can elaborate on another time, but because I only have a few minutes in this recording, but to answer your question about TikTok, for example, we discussed what's knowable about you previously. What data are you giving off? What patterns are you giving off? And when you download an application to your phone and you sign that privacy agreement that nobody reads, you're giving it access to every other application on your phone. So the reality is your social media platforms aren't necessarily listening to you. What they're doing is worse. They're inferring you based on what you're doing across applications. The issue with TikTok isn't the stories that you're seeing at the end of the funnel. Like I said previously, it's the data that TikTok has access to when you download it to your phone and sign away that privacy agreement, especially if you are somebody who is working within the U.S. government, who, maybe you're in the military and you're being deployed, and, it's not great for your data to be collected and for your contacts and who you're speaking to be observed by an application. Now, every application does this. Facebook does this. Twitter does this. Every app on your phone does this. The issue specifically with with TikTok is with great power competition. The U.S. government isn't necessarily clear on where that data is going and where it's being sold. That doesn't mean that they necessarily know with any of the other applications either, but there is concern on TikTok with the data of American citizens, especially within the U.S. government, being used not just to propagate stories, but to, like My Refugees at the Camp, hack, track, and extort U.S. personnel, which makes it a really scary application, specifically in TikTok because of its ownership. Now, my stance on it is kind of middle of the ground, right? Like maybe if you're working in U.S. government, you shouldn't have TikTok on your phone, but you also shouldn't probably have other social media on your phone. But then the other side of that is if you don't have any social media, if you don't have any data footprint, that's also a pattern. So it's a really complicated catch-22 of an issue. But to go back, the TikTok issue isn't about the stories that we're seeing at the end of the funnel. It's about the data that's collected in the application and where that data goes.
Hey, Hallie, thank you for clarifying that. That was really helpful. I just love how simple you make things for us, even though they feel pretty huge. It's great, and your style really comes from a place of activism almost, which I really appreciate. Because I think that combination really can make an impact because you're looking out for all of our best interest. I feel like whether we're clients or just people listening to you, and I'm really happy you're here on Swell, and I'm hoping we can continue conversations here as you kind of connect to different issues that you come up with, different experiences you have. I would just love to be able to invite you here to share them, to include us in your journey, because it really is ever changing, I'm sure. It's really an exciting landscape. It's really an exciting time, especially in the ethical tech world, because everyone's really heightened in a good way. I think there's a lot of good people banding together to educate the public and also make sure that any nefarious actors know that we're out there and we're looking to help right some wrongs. But it feels a little more friendly when you talk about it, which I really appreciate. So thank you so much, and I look forward to more conversations in this particular interview, if some people chime in, and also just in general. Thanks so much.
Hey, Adam. Absolutely. That's a really great question. So you're never going to turn off all the data. Big ad tech works on your data, right? You kind of have to feed the beast for your environment to work. But there are things you can do to make it a little less invasive. Toggling is one of them. You can go into each one of the applications on your phone and turn off, Siri specifically listening, or sharing data across applications. It still does, but it makes it less. You can turn your mic off and your camera off for certain applications if you are nervous about listening, because while they're not doing it, like there have been cases of it happening like here and there. It's not a consistent thing. As far as going on like social media, going into your personal settings and looking at what your ad settings look like, and removing yourself or turning off some of the settings when it comes to your ads collected. But again, you do still need to have a pattern. You can't completely disappear. So I wouldn't be so worried about like making yourself invisible, but you can make it, I guess, a little bit better. I also use a VPN on my phone. TorGuard is a good one. NordVPN works. They're not very expensive. I think ExpressVPN is pretty okay. I don't remember if it's okay or not. I'll look it up. But being mindful of what you're visiting, what you're Googling, what you're doing on your applications, who you're talking to. When you're engaging in a conversation in a thread, for example, it's registered as a relevant thread. So the more people that interact, the more it'll be seen by more people. So if you're fighting with a troll online, you're likely not fighting with a real person, but you are feeding into, an algorithmic ranking. So just being cognizant of what you are doing. But you do have privacy settings in your phone that do allow you to toggle off some of the data collection that's happening. You have to go more than just in your one settings application. You have to go through each application and change the settings for it. And just don't have applications on your phone that you're not using. And have a different password for everything. I mean, you can use different password managers to manage it, and this is easier said than done. I mean, I certainly have holes in my own algorithmic ecosystem, but having that awareness, knowing what's knowable about you, knowing what your patterns are, knowing that if you are walking around in downtown DC, You might get advertisements for some of the stores that you were by because your phone is pinging to that cell network. And even if you put a VPN on your phone, you're still pinging to that cell network. So my biggest recommendation is awareness. I don't use other phones unless I have to, but I'm pretty careful about what I download. And if I do download something new to my phone, it has a very specific purpose, and it's restricted on what it has access to. And I change that in the settings as well. You can clear your cookies. I suggest you do. You can download what is collected on you from Google and other sources. You can remove yourself from like white page listings to get rid of like your phone number and email address. And that's really just as easy as like Googling yourself and going through and requesting that your information be removed. But it's hard. It's a game of whack-a-mole. You can only do so much. You still have to exist in the data. This is still the environment that we live and work in. So knowing that as well. And yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you to how to stay totally safe. But there are mitigation strategies. Happy to elaborate on some of these if you would like. What a question. My feelings on the issue are all over the place. I think a lot of people have a lot of ideas on how to mitigate harm in the digital information space. But it's become a little bit of a witch hunt because nobody really knows how the ecosystem works, how the algorithms work. And like I said earlier, you don't have to be a techie or a hacker to get the ecosystem, but you do have to like understand that it's not witchcraft, right? So I think that a lot of policies are being made that are maybe a little uninformed. For example, I don't think we should be doing so much content moderation, even though, I mean, there's definitely a need for content moderation, but that shouldn't be the only focus. Or like media literacy is so important, but it also shouldn't be the only focus. There's so much that goes into the back end of story propagation in general that I think that if we shifted our focus to, it would be a lot easier to come up with policies and legislation to like help, I don't know, broaden the scope of the content that people see so they're not siloed based on their data. For example, like making it harder to collect data on children under 18 so that they're not like already in a very siloed, cohorted footprint through their data by the time they reach adulthood. Right, so then then it's no longer a First Amendment rights issue. It is a policy issue. It is a tech issue for practitioners to say, oh, maybe we shouldn't be using, telemetrics from somebody's mobile device to measure where they are so that we can target, the ad that I showed, the person walking by them 10 minutes ago, right? Like it's too much, it's too invasive. Marketing is and will always be a thing, but we can go back to like broadly sharing stories and having access to more information. So that's my opinion on it. I think disinformation is a cybersecurity issue, and people disagree with me. But I do think that there are ways to implement norms and standards in data collection in the ad tech economy to help mitigate some harms. Again, there is no such thing as a catch-all that will fix this, right? Like it's not going to go away. We're going to continue to advance technologically, and more information and more products are going to be available to us. So then it becomes more of a algorithmic human rights issue, which we have already so many disagreements in our country about. But as far as like legislating freedom of speech, like I don't think that's the way to go about it. And I think that's the only way that maybe some policymakers have known to go about it, because they're seeing the end result, which is the story in a feed or the news that they're seeing. But I mean, There's the media ecosystem. How does a journalist get a tip through whatever is sending messages to them through their algorithm? There's what it's so vast. I can speak in circles about it forever. I mean, it's such a catch-22. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I do think that if we shift our thinking and treat this as a technical issue, rather than just a social issue, again, educational programs, media literacy, taking down like extremist content from like terrorist organizations, like, yeah, absolutely. But for everything else, this, I think, is an issue of data collection and data security, and how that data is used to influence, if you will, people within their networks. I know that doesn't really answer the question. If I had the answers, I'd be a billionaire. But that's how I see it. It's not going away. So our options are to let it dominate us, or come up with a new perspective on how to mitigate offline harm in the online arena.
I absolutely hear what you are saying. There is a quote that I really love by someone that I look up to, Laura Gallant. And she says in her TED Talk that at the end of every 1 and 0 is a human and their story, right? So we are faced with godlike technology, but this is where the human side of cyber conflict is. It is human created. So while we have pretty backwards views, I think, socially in so many instances, and, you know, our brains haven't necessarily evolved to the point of keeping up with the technology that we're creating. The key point is that we are creating it. We're the ones responding to what is happening online, and we're the ones who are putting what's happening online there. And this goes back to the very, very, very introduction of this chat, where, you know, I say on my LinkedIn, everything that happens, I think it's everything that happens online influences human response offline before making its way into the digital sphere. You know, turning that perspective, this is all human created. This godlike technology that is making everything so topsy-turvy and creating such disorder is a collection of human minds. OpenAI is built on the language of the open internet, the data that comes from everybody, and how to process ideas collectively like people do. And I think we often forget that we created this. And so I'm hoping, I'm hopeful for humanity. You know, right now things kind of look dim, but, you know, I hope that if we can create something godlike that, you know, online, maybe we can collectively fix ourselves offline. And I know that's like kumbaya, like, you know, world peacey. But it really is amazing what humans can collectively do. And that is exemplified by the internet, open data, and the way that we both push information out and absorb information. So there has to be some middle ground there. I don't know what that middle ground is. I don't know what it's going to take for humanity offline to collectively act in a way that advances humanity offline, just like it's advancing us online. But there has to be something there. Taking that bird's eye view, you know, we have so much farther to go. We have so much to learn. I don't necessarily think the solution is to pedal backwards with technology, but I do think it may be worth a pause of humans saying, what have we created? How is this impacting us? And how can we adapt? So, I mean, it is all of the issues. It is a human technology impacting humans who are responding to it. It becomes an existential issue. Nobody quite has the answer, but conversations like this, I think, are so important because A, awareness, and B, diversity of thought. If I can get somebody to think about the issue slightly differently, maybe they'll have a solution, and that would be amazing. But it does start with awareness, and it does start by looking at the human side of cyber conflict and digital disorder. So I'll end it on that, but happy to keep the conversation going and continue the thought process. But this has been absolutely a joy to discuss.